Thank you. Well, several deeply reported books have documented Donald Trump's rage. We have had angry presidents before, but we have never had a rageaholic like Donald Trump. We can only imagine how high his rage is peaking tonight, now that a federal judge who he appointed has dismissed Donald Trump's frivolous lawsuit to block the Treasury from handing over Donald Trump's tax returns to the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal. Donald Trump's rage at the judge he appointed and who he probably believed he owned is accompanied tonight by his rage at the news that his longtime accountant at the Mazars accounting firm, Donald Bender, has been granted immunity to testify to the grand jury in Manhattan investigating Donald Trump's businesses. The Washington Post says that Mr. Bender, quote, could serve as a human roadmap through Donald Trump's tax returns. And all of that rage comes on top of the more than 24 hours of rage Donald Trump has been experiencing about his last White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows' texts revealing that Fox hosts and congressional Republicans were all trying to tell him what to do when the Capitol was being attacked on January 6th. Because they were all, as their texts show, absolutely certain that the most ignorant and incompetent president in history was sitting in the White House with absolutely no idea what to do. That's what their texts show about what they thought about Donald Trump on January 6th. And how livid is Donald Trump tonight about the public revelation that the cowardly Donald Trump Jr. on January 6th finally said what Donald Trump Jr. may have been trying to say for his whole life. But because he is Donald Trump Jr., he was not allowed to say it to his father. He was allowed to say it to a guy working for his father, Mark Meadows. He has to lead now. That's what Donald Trump Jr. told Mark Meadows about his father when the Capitol was being attacked. He has to lead now. That is a cry from the deepest part of Donald Trump Jr.'s shallow heart, the hopeless cry from a cowardly son to a cowardly father who has never known how to lead. Donald Trump has never known how to lead anyone, not his children, not his company, which is now under criminal investigation with one officer of the company already indicted, and certainly not his country. If Donald Trump were still allowed to use Twitter, he would no doubt be filling Twitter tonight with a hateful nickname for the federal judge, Trevor McFadden, in the district court in Washington, D.C., who dismissed Donald Trump's lawsuit trying to prevent the Treasury from following the law and giving his tax returns to House Ways and Means Chairman Richie Neal. Judge McFadden, who Donald Trump appointed, said that Donald Trump, quote, is wrong on the law. A long line of Supreme Court cases requires great deference to facially valid congressional inquiries. Even the special solicitude accorded former presidents does not alter the outcome. The court will therefore dismiss this case. Judge McFadden began his opinion at the beginning of taxation. Congress first levied an income tax in 1862 at the height of the Civil War. Under that law, the public could access and inspect any tax return. Judge McFadden reviewed the special law that allows only the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee to request copies of any tax return from the IRS. Donald Trump tried to have the law found unconstitutional on its face, a claim Judge McFadden dismissed. Donald Trump falsely claimed that Chairman Neal was abusing his power just so he could make Donald Trump's tax returns public. In the final line of Judge McFadden's 45-page decision, he said, it might not be right or wise to publish the returns, but it is the chairman's right to do so. Congress has granted him this extraordinary power, and courts are loath to second-guess congressional motives or duly enacted statutes. The court will not do so here and thus must dismiss this case. Chairman Neal and his staff will not be able to enlist the help of Donald Trump's accountants to provide a roadmap through Donald Trump's tax returns, since Donald Trump's accountant is already doing that under oath with immunity to a grand jury in Manhattan. Donald Bender testified recently to that grand jury, and prosecutors recently interviewed Rosemary Vrablic, a former managing director at Deutsche Bank who oversaw hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to Donald Trump. The Washington Post reports, quote, "The appearances by Bender and Vrablic suggest prosecutors are seeking information about Trump's finances from a small circle of outside partners who handle details of Trump's taxes and real estate deals. Bender and Vrablic were never Trump employees, but they knew more about this company's inner workings than many employees did." Donald Bender has been forced to testify under oath in the past about Donald Trump's tax returns, including in Donald Trump's frivolous lawsuit against our first guest tonight, Tim O'Brien, who Donald Trump sued for libel when Tim O'Brien reported in his book that Donald Trump had lied about his wealth. Tim O'Brien, of course, won that lawsuit. And joining us now are Tim O'Brien, senior